So I've made my 3 lames, and we've seen how that one works well there, but there is a massive difference between the shape of that rear brace, sorry, the shape of that Spaulders and the shape of this rear brace. We've got to bridge that gap by moving this in a little bit, changing the shape of that a bit, but importantly by using the lames. Now, find the midpoint. By that I mean, imagine the man's looking straight at you, that's where his arm will be. And what you want the Spaulders to be doing is coming off at this angle, about 90 degrees. So find the midpoint, make a mark. Take one of your lames, this stage doesn't really matter which one, make a mark. Just gives you a vague idea where the middle will be. You can see how, because this is curved, and there's a curve here, it's taken our lames from being at 90 degrees like that, to starting to curve it round, which then works nicely with the Spaulders cop, and you end up with a lovely shape on the top of the arm. Also, these can work in and out of each other a lot easier. I want to close these gaps down, so I'm going to spend a bit of time just pulling that around, getting that gap better. I don't want it entirely flush because it will restrict the movement, but I want it nice, and that isn't nice at the moment. You imagine the weapon getting in there quite readily. So I'm going to close that down a little bit, and then I'll show you what the next bit is. So here we go. We've got the lame fitting more or less as I want it to be. Relatively tight, but not so tight that it can't move. Now remember, on a lot of effigies, with this in the front, we're going to be cutting out some of this material, so when it goes up into the armpit you can move freely. And the same at the back. There's our midpoint. Actually our lame is going to stop about ½ an inch to an inch in from there, and at the minute it goes well past it. So the lame at the moment is much bigger in length than I need it to be, but I'm just going to stick with that for the time being. Now we need to get from this diameter to more or less this diameter, and with 3 lames we've got quite a bridge to gap. So what I do, I've marked my lame down here. There's a little nick, should just about be able to pick that up. Number 1, it's on the side that the cooter wing is on, marks the front so I can know my left from my right when I'm taking these all to pieces and cleaning them. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull that edge up like that and do the same on the back. And all you've got to do to get that is just find anything with a bit of an angle in like this, gently wedge it and give it a twist. Now you want that twist to be moving along here, you don't want it just on the end. Again, let's give it a little twist. I've gone the wrong way. Let it square again because it can pull it out of true a bit. Check it fits. Remove all of these bits. And you can see how now as this starts to go up the arm it's going to be moving outwards and better fit this when we get to it. So this is marked as number 1. Choose another and make that work on top of that one using the same process. Mark a middle point, get them relatively flush as you can, and then move on to the third. Now you've got to think the way these are going to work with each other. If they are absolutely flush and tight, they're not going to be able to move very well. So you want a tiny gap between them. But this gap here is too big. So what I do is just get them over one of the stakes over there and push that down. And I'll show you how to do that bit next. So the issue I've got is this gap here. It's too large. So get yourself over a stake. Use that as though it's the shoulder, the bluff of the shoulder, so it's moving down. Doesn't matter if you haven't got one like that, you can do it up there, but it's just easier. Get it married up and tap the top one. You can start to see how we're closing this to where we want it to be, which is there. Now, we can't move this one out because it already fits nicely. So we've got to move that one down. So give it a little tweak. Get in there and then just keep going. Gently tapping it down, teasing it over. If it's not moving far enough, do it on its own. Put them back together. There we go, we're just about there now. One more pass, I suspect. Perfect. They've got a nice movement with one another. And they're not binding or catching. So we've got our 3 lames that we've cut. They're ready to go. You can see they want to move back in on themselves like that, which creates that pinch you see on so many effigies at the front, where the lames are narrower here in the depiction, wider there, and then slightly narrower at the back. So it's perfect. It's exactly what we want. And then when you put the shoulder with it as well, still got a bit of marrying up to do there. We're going to do that in just a moment. But when we put the shoulder with it there as well, you can see how the whole lot wants to move in that circular motion and cradle the shoulder as opposed to being sat on top. Now, our next problem is if I put those straight on there now, not only do they look ugly, it looks dreadful, square at the front there at the top. You don't get that cutout that you should see at the top of the arm. But also, where am I going to put my leathers? If I put them in the wrong place, I'm going to end up shortening and exposing the leather or having to shift them again. So our midpoint that we started with at the beginning is there. Make sure I've got the first lame. I'll offer that up, and I can see how, when I make my cut here to start that scalloping at the front, I can see by looking at this, I'm just going to put an arrow on this to show which way is forward facing, because I've taken this pick about 20 times now. I can see as long as I'm doing vaguely that, I should be okay. I take the number 2 lane, the midpoint I've already marked, line it up, and as long as I'm just outside that, because I'm not going to trim these down exactly yet, this is close work so I can see where to put my leathers. As long as I'm doing that, we'll be good. I can do an arrow on there to show which way is forward. And the third one, again, line up my midpoint. I can see I can make my cut vaguely around here. Need a Sharpie that works. And there is the forward point on all 3 of those lames. So when they're all on there nicely, you can start to see how you get that shape that we're after at the front. Doesn't look very good at the minute, but we're still quite distant from doing it. And we repeat the same at the back. Just a word on the back, there is the midpoint of the back of the arm, as though you're looking straight at the back of the guy. You can't have your lames like I have here going all the way around. You won't be able to pull your arm back in a movement. It's got to go outside of that midpoint. Anything here is just going to be in the way. In fact, a bit later I'm going to trim this anyway, something like that, so that you can move your arm back. So you find your midpoint there on the side, you've got your midpoint on the back, just come inside it, 5 or 6 mil, just over 1/8 of an inch, 5/32 of an inch, whatever it is, and just do something like that. And again, repeat the process on those ones, and then you're ready to cut. So I've got 3 leather straps ready to go, and I've put some holes in the ends of them for the first part that we do, which is quite straightforward and doesn't need much measuring. I'm on the rear brace. Remember, we've cut away that scallop, which is going to form part of the armpit. All of this will be gone. That's going to form part of that armpit. There's the midpoint running up the bicep and the midpoint at the back. So we know that our lames are going to sit, the first one, in that area there. And we want to make sure, as far as possible, that we cover these holes up. So, to get us started, what I'll do is get some, in this case 4mm or 5/32 almost, nuts and bolts, and take the ends off. You can see there how I've done that. Let's grind that off so it's a lot thinner. And we push it through. And stick that on. Leave them so they can move a bit, and when you rivet them as well, so they can move a bit and slide around. Do that with all 3, and then we'll come back to that. You have to excuse me if I tend to waffle on a little bit in this, because a lot of this now I just do by judgment, but I want to make sure that I pass on what I can. So we've got our marks in here all ready to go. We want to drill some holes in this soon, which are going to be about 2 mil off of the top edge, so that when the next lame is on top you can't see them, or you might just clip it, but you get the idea. So just like we did here, mark that along, and we know where our centre one's going to be. There's our centre line that we put on the rear brace, there's our centre line on the lame. We line that up, and we know that that's where it's going to be on the leather. Drill your hole in the metal there, and then we'll come back to the other two on the back. So we've got that work in there. You can see it already wants to go slightly over, because we've done all this curving work on it, which is perfect. So make sure that comes down just level with this one there, so you can just see a little bit of it poking out. Put your leather up, mark a mark like I've done there. You can see where you've got to drill your next hole. When you've drilled that, repeat the process we did here and fix your leather. And then on the back you'll be ready to do that one. Repeat that process over and over until we get to the top of the Spaulders, and we'll stick that on. So we've got our 3 lames in place. What these give is the ability for you to rotate your shoulder. Okay, that allows that movement. There's a bit of compression there undoubtedly, but they allow for that sort of movement, which is why you want a tight fit like you've got here, but not a loose fit like I have at the back here. You can see this needs closing down and sorting out, but I'll do all that when the whole thing's together. It's eminently simpler to do. Okay, so these give a traversing movement. You rotate a cuff and all that sort of stuff when you're rotating your shoulder. And this bit here, by being riveted on, I'm going to show you in a moment, gives you a compression by being able to collapse onto the shoulder in whichever way it is that's required. So, offer it up. Should have marked my centre point before. Needs a bit of tidying up, but for the purposes of this video, it's good enough. So, find your centre point. Make sure the front's tidier more than the back, because that's where people are going to be. And mark it. Okay, so there is our centre point on that, nice and marked. And all you're going to do is go up. I'm just using that as a line. You can use a ruler, you can use whatever you fancy really. And you want to go up to about there. You can see there's no hard and fast rule on this. I've done it on this one, and it's, there we go, 3 fingers. 3 fingers. Pop it in there. I think if you measure everything to the nearest millimetre or 64th of an inch, it loses some of its charm and what armour ought to be, loses some of its humanity. Obviously you don't want to be way out. So we're going to pop a hole in there, and then in the leather, and then we'll get those stuck on. The first of the nuts and bolts is in place. This is the front, this is the back of our piece. So what I do, make sure my line's lined up there. I don't want it pulled back so it's going up square and level with this. Remember, right at the beginning we want this to have a slight curve. So we line it up with that slight curve in mind. It's a bit flat here, I need to pull that up a little bit, but it's still good enough and close enough to be able to rivet. So what I do is I get my leather being pinched underneath here on my hand where I need it to be. When I'm satisfied that that's in place and everything's squared, flip it over. Bit of guesswork now. I've got my line there, I come across, pop it on the back of that, just to give me an idea on the metal work where I need to be. That's good enough. So now what we do, we punch a hole in here in our piece of metalwork and we've got the front one done. Offer it up, punch a hole in the leather, and then we do the back one. Holes punched through there. So as before, get it back to where I'm happy. It's got that nice curve on. Pushing the leather from underneath through. Take your pen, make a mark. Knock a hole through this. In, bolt it together. Rinse and repeat on the back. So here we go, all done, put the 3 in. It's an awful lot of tidying up to do, you don't need all this leather here, you just need to trim it off. What it's a good idea to do as well is to mark each one of these in some way that you'll remember which arm they're on and whether they're the front, middle or back. So I tend to go for LF, LM, LB for left, front, middle and back, and mark it on the other side of the leather, and then people won't see it when it's in situ. You can see that compression I was talking about in action now, hopefully, where it still needs to soften off the leather, but you can see how, it's its first time moving, there we go, easing off now. You can see how there's your compression that you need in the arm when you're doing big movements, and then with that long stretch of leather there and these 3 being done as well in that way, you get a really nice rotation and compression when you need it, and it works marvellously. The guys that were making these things back in the day and developing this were absolute masters of their craft. So all I've got left to do is tidy all this up, close these gaps down, figure out the front scallop that I want here. You can see that shape starting to form. I just want to follow that line down, I like that one, cut it down and into these and make it there nicely be filled with mail when the chap's wearing it and so on. But there, in a bumbling sort of way, is how I make an attached Spaulder for a late 14th, early 15th century harness. You see, it's not that hard. At some point in the future I'll do one of the bigger separate Italian ones, and you can see some of the small differences, and we'll spend a bit more time on the actual manufacture. But you can see how all those little curves and bits and pieces work together really well and make a nicely moving, nicely compressing Spaulder, which won't impinge the wearer at all. Hope that's useful. Like and subscribe and all that good stuff I'm supposed to say at the end of these videos. Drop a comment below if you think I've missed anything, fouled it up, whatever, and I'll happily try and get back to you.